Hey guys, in our last video we worked in Blender to deal with UV mapping and texture painting in order to add some color to our mushroom, and in order to submit that there are a number of things that you could still do to make it or to get a quality picture. One thing that you've been doing so far is just taking screenshots and uploading them, but we can get a much better quality thing out of Blender. If we jump into the program, you can see obviously on our viewport here we've got all of these grid lines and stuff like that. Now we can deal with this a bit better. What we actually need to do though, in order to use the built-in rendering functions, is to actually insert a camera, and then we can render an image out of the view that that camera sees, and we can that's how you could manipulate the angle and things like that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change this window here from, leave this one open, we're going to use this in a minute, plus it's difficult to close and I haven't shown you how to close it, so just leave it there. You could slide it over if you want. We're going to change this back to object mode and just zoom out a little bit, and you can see here these are the lights that we inserted before. What we're going to do is just grab our 3D cursor and put it sort of up in the sky somewhere. Doesn't really matter as long as it's up in the sky somewhere. Oh, even then if it's down below it doesn't matter, you can move it around later. And we're going to choose add camera. Now this thing comes in. Now there was one of these in the scene by default when you first created the new file. If you didn't delete that camera, I would suggest you use the existing one rather than adding another one. And if you have a look at this tree up here, these are all the objects in your thing. So now I've currently got one cylinder, which is my mushroom that I've changed from a cylinder to a mushroom. I've got one camera, and I've got 4 point lights. So you should only have one camera. If you have more than one, you'll want to delete one of them. Now, what this thing means, and why this shape is the way it is, and how you can understand that, is such that you can imagine this pyramid is the camera, this is the back of the camera, and this rectangle is kind of the viewport that you're peering out of, and this arrow is pointing up. So this is the top of the camera, and this is where you're looking out, and this is where you're looking from. So if you like, this is where you're standing, this is where the window is that you're looking through, and this is just telling you which way up is. So what we need to do is rotate this and manipulate the camera so that we're actually looking at the mushroom. So we're just going to grab our rotate tool while we've got that camera selected and start to rotate it so that you think it's roughly pointing at the camera. I did this a minute ago just to practice, and it was out of sorts. It came in a really weird orientation. So based on a number of things, it might take you quite a bit to actually manipulate this correctly. What I suggest you do now to get this on point is we're going to slide our screen back across now, our other screen. We're going to change this one. When we first created this window, you'll remember it was just a second mushroom viewport screen. We could see this thing here again. And to change it, we came up here and we changed it from 3D viewport to UV editor. Now we changed it to image editor when we were doing our painting. Now we're going to go back to 3D viewport, and then we're going to change the view here to cameras. And we have to set active object as the camera. That's when we've got the camera selected. And then, or you could go viewpoint camera. No, I beg your pardon. So we have to go view, cameras, set active object as camera. And now you're looking through the camera on this screen. You can try and manipulate the camera here while you're looking through it, but I find that quite difficult. For example, I've just hit G for grab, and you can move that there, and you could hit S for scale. It sort of scales the camera up or down. I'm not too sure what that does. Or you could use R for rotate to spin that around, but it only lets you spin on that axis, and I'm not sure how to spin it on the other axes. So I prefer to just look through it here and do the manipulation of it over here. So for example, I can still move it away, I can move it sideways, and I can rotate it over here, if you know what I mean. Whatever. So you want to position this somewhere that you're happy with it. Get the mushroom positioned properly, and that's it. Once we've done that, we can actually go up to render image, and here we can see whatever your camera is seeing. Now this still looks pretty dodgy. It's dull, the lights aren't great. How can we make this better? One of the things that we can do to make it better is get rid of this sheen. Mushrooms aren't a solid plastic. They're not shiny, and you can see that here this is a little bit, it reflects the light. If I go back into my render again, it's not working too well with the lights here, but whatever. So So what I can actually do is just select my mushroom here. So I've got the mouse select tool, selected the mushroom, and then in my materials tab, the material properties tab where we were doing some of the texturing stuff before, you want to scroll down here and find specular, where it says specular, and just click on that and drag it down to 0, and that will get rid of a lot of the reflection. One of the other reasons mine looks silly is because I didn't finish painting any dots on this side, they're on the other side, so I'm just going to spin my mushroom around rather than moving the camera. Spin the mushroom around, that's a bit easier for me. You get the idea. And one of the other things that we can do is to play with the strength of the lights. If we actually create a render now, we can see that not much is happening, and that's because we've made our mushroom, if we were to convert this to metric or imperial units, our mushroom is probably something like 3 meters. You'll remember in an earlier video I mentioned how they've recently included meters, and I don't really understand that. So perhaps our mushroom is just really big. Now what happens is if I come up here to render, so I've got my camera created. If I come up here to render and choose render image, it'll take a second to generate, and you can see that this is still quite dull. It's dim, it's dull, you can't really see anything, it's really sort of faded. And so what I can do to fix that is if we come to our point lights, so if you choose your lights over on here or you click them on the screen, doesn't matter, and on this menu on the side here you want to come to, when you choose an object, you get some tools here that are to do with manipulating the object and the materials, but when you choose a light, you get a little green light to do with the light properties. You can change the color of the light, you can also change the strength. This is supposed to correlate to wattage, like a real life bulb puts out X amount of watts, 10 watts, 20 watts, whatever. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to set this to something crazy like 3000 watts. And I'm going to do that for each of these point lights, just quickly. So I'm just clicking them up here, coming back to the power tab, and changing that up to a massive value. And now when I render it out again, you can see it's a lot brighter, and I start to get some shadows underneath where those lights are casting shadows over the mushroom top. I think perhaps it's a bit too bright now. So you could spend quite a bit of time manipulating those lights, changing the strength and the color of each of them. You could also, if you wanted to, you could add in a different type of light, like a spotlight, and then you could delete these point lights. And then start to manipulate the spotlight that I've got here so that it's pointing at the object. Whatever. And now if I render that again, okay, it's really dull because my spotlight has a weak strength, so I forgot to change that. If I crank that up to something crazy again, like 3000, and now render, it's, it just gives you a different look. So I've got shadows down there. Now if you were to actually create, so the other thing that you'll notice when I render is I've still got this sort of nothing background. There's no shadows being cast from my mushroom onto the floor, because in my 3D space we don't have a floor. That doesn't exist. And so what you could do while you're in object mode is choose add mesh plane, and this plane can just be basically a floor. Now if I scale this so that it's huge, like massive, I'm just dragging my mouse heaps there, and now I'm going to move it down underneath the mushroom. And you could texture that, put a grass pattern on it, you could make it whatever color you like, it doesn't really matter. But now when you render, you should see that the mushroom starts to cast shadows onto the ground behind it. Because there's actually something there that it can cast its shadow onto. The reason I had to make that plane so big is so that I don't see the edge of the plane here on the side of my view, and you could play with that if you want to. So I'd encourage you guys to play with cameras, play with lights, put a plane underneath it, and just start to manipulate stuff until you get a render that you like the look of. Thanks. So from here, once you've got that, you'll need to go to Image, Save As, in order to generate a PNG file of that. And given that you guys are in Multimedia 2, you already understand file types, PNG should be fine for you to deal with. So save that and go and upload that or email it to your teacher. Thanks. Bye.